Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much indeed for joining us today for our event in conjunction with the PRCA and the Work Crowd on how to best engage with the press. My name is Alice Waitman. I'm the co-founder of the Work Crowd, an online platform that connects talented freelancers directly with projects, and I'm also the chair of the independent group for the PRCA. So I'm delighted we've got such a great turnout today, made up of individuals from the independence group, but also NextGen, as well as the wider audience across the Work Crowd. So thank you very much indeed for all coming this evening, and to hear from our industry experts who really do have a fantastic background, and they're going to share their sort of top tips on how to best engage with the press. So thank you very much, Arun, Adam, and Deborah, for joining me this evening. Just as ways, a sort of short introduction, but I will let the panel give you a little bit more flavour of their backgrounds as I ask them some questions. Initially, Arun, he has a fantastic background, has worked all around the world as a communications specialist and author of 4 books, media trainer, and has worked on global brands and media outlets. So lots of experience there to share. Adam, likewise, has had a fascinating career from San Francisco to London, has a Rolodex of industry contacts, and has worked from Fleet Street and also in the PR world, and is now an independent. And Deborah is a communications strategist, also a freelancer, has worked on both sides of being a journalist and worked on in-house the likes of NHS and Department of International Development. So thank you so much indeed for joining us. Let's get straight into it, but before I do ask the questions, please do use the functionality at the bottom. We have an area to ask questions and a chat area, so I will be filtering questions into the panel, and we like things to be as interactive as possible. So well, let's start with yourself. I mean, if you give us a little bit of background to your experience, but also before we sort of talk about how to best engage with the press, it'd be great to understand what is the press. I mean, it really has changed in the 20 years that I've been headhunting in this industry. From traditional print to almost online version to now, it doesn't seem to be a stop and starting point. So give us a bit of flavour of what is the media.
Who's that for?
Deborah.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I was ready. Actually, yeah, I was ready for this one, but it was actually, I was hoping you weren't going to ask me this one, because I think it's a great question. But it's such a difficult question when we're talking to communications professionals, because we kind of all know what the media is, don't we? We know how we kind of consume news, and I've been in the media for some 25 years, and it's almost like that problem of being too close to it. So I think too close to it, and also trying to avoid stating the obvious. So the two difficulties, first of all. So I did what most PR people do, and was stepped back and tried to look at it through a different lens, tried to think, actually, you know, if there was this person that didn't know what the media was, what would it be? And I went back to my old employer, the Department for International Development, because I think they have a really interesting media strategy. They're dealing internationally, they're dealing with a lot of developing countries, and they're dealing with lots of kind of different models of media, and, you know, some state-run media as well. So I wanted to kind of get a nice, simple kind of catch-all of what's the media, and something that I think describes what the media was when I started in the media all that time ago, but also describes it now. And I really like this. I'm going to read it out. It's the media is a conduit through which voices, perspectives, and lives are brought into the public sphere. And being an ex-TV journalist, I like that 20-second soundbite. So yeah, so I think it's obviously, when I started in the media, the zeitgeist was that we all kind of listened to the news at 6 o'clock, news at 10 o'clock, listened to the Today programme, read the Times, the Guardian, or the Telegraph, you know, whatever your political persuasion was. And there was a real zeitgeist about where people got their news. Nowadays, of course, we all know digital is the real disruptor. And somebody my age, who still works in the media, has completely changed. I was an absolute kind of, the Times newspaper was my parents' thing, my thing. I don't buy the Times anymore. And it's really sad I was reading in UK Press Gazette this morning how the circulations of the national press particularly have fallen off a cliff. At the same time, people, digital platforms like Joe Media have just gone into the stratosphere about, their audience and their reach. And I think I'm right in saying for people under 35, it's the main source of news for them. So it's just massively changed. I think a couple of other reflections I just wanted to kind of throw in, and be really interested in what other people think as well, is I do a little bit of writing still. I love women's magazines and still do some kind of wellbeing writing. But we've all become, we all have this huge opportunity to become content creators, to be the media, as it were. And in lockdown, I started a podcast for female leaders, around female leadership. And we have not a huge, but a very engaged audience of women who are key decision makers. So we are now getting kind of people coming to us saying, can you cover this story? Because you're a pretty great audience for people to reach. And I just noticed, I was just flicking through, I still do read the Sunday Times online. I was just noticing the last couple of months, so many of their features have come from Substack, which are these content platforms, paid for content platforms, where people can produce material. And I think if you're in PR, if you're not doing this already, it is such a great opportunity to really start to kind of craft your own messages and become that content creator, which I think is such a powerful thing for PR people to do now. I have lots of other things to talk about, impartiality and whether news should be entertainment, but I think I'll leave it there.
That's great. Well, lots of things we can deep dive into later on in the discussion. So thank you for that, Deborah. Adam, I'm going to come to you next. You can give us a little bit of flavour of your background, but also tell us a little bit more about the stories that journalists really are looking for.
I was a journalist for 25 years, worked for a lot of the tabloids, did a bit for BBC and ITV way back when, and spent the last 20 years of my Fleet Street career at the Times. Was a news editor for the papers, online news editor, senior correspondent, crime correspondent, did lots of business features as well. And then I went to the darker side I left the Times in 2011 to go to PR. And I think that what journalists are looking for hasn't changed for hundreds of years. It's a good story that will appeal to their readership, which sounds very simple. But if you've got clients who may think their story is brilliant, it's sometimes it's up to the PR to shape it to make sure it fits an agenda, or it fits a current trend. It's your job to get it into the paper, but to engage a journalist. And the most important thing is to make sure the most interesting bits of that story are in the intro, because every newspaper, every national newspaper or news editor of any publication, online or newspaper, will have thousands of stories to choose from every single day, and no one has the time to read through 7, 8, 12 paragraphs. If your most interesting bit is in the 5th paragraph, it probably gets spiked before it even gets past the journalist or past the news desk. So I think it's just about recognizing what is interesting, and if you can't and how to make something interesting, which sounds stating the bleeding obvious, but it doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm. And we'll come on to a bit more about that, because there might be businesses who have a product or a launch or something that they want that isn't that interesting. So how do they stand out? But we'll deep dive a bit more on that. Thank you, Adam. Arun, I'd love to talk to you next. Perhaps you could share a little bit of your background and share with us how to capture the attention of a journalist and how best to engage. And I know you've got quite an international background, so it would be great to sort of weave a bit of that in there as well.
Okay, I've been on the both sides of the fence, in fact, almost 22, 23 years of journalism at the BBC, at Star News, that's the sister concern of Sky News here, and then a couple of newspapers, and then I moved to corporate as in-house communication professional. The Tata Group, everybody knows about it, who made the Jaguar, Land Rover, TT and all. So both sides of the fence I've seen how a journalist, because I've been a journalist, so how I work, and then I was experienced, of course, what I should do to engage me, a journalist. Okay, so what my experience tells is, as Adam said, that it's nothing else than a story. Everybody needs a story, especially a journalist needs a story, nothing else. And as a PR professional, we are the salesperson. We have to sell a product to them. Okay, so, and what's the story? Story is that engages, that's engaging enough. I'm saying this, if PR professionals are there, don't sell your data, don't sell your statement, don't sell your figures, unless you're a huge NGO, UNICEF or something like that, or a Bank of England. Sell a story which connects to each and everybody of that newspaper or say TV network or radio or whatever. The next thing is the impact, relevance, very important. A journalist always look at context. If a context is there, you say, it's like what you want to say and what they need. There's a kind of a bridge between both. What you want to say, what you want to communicate around, and what they want. So then, of course, there would be human faces, a lot of research is involved. And yes, Adam has mentioned it. If the story is in the 5th para, nobody reads it. So there's a thumb rule. I've been teaching, I've been mentoring almost 2,000 professionals around. The first thing I used to tell your story in first 2 lines, first 2 sentences. If there is nothing in first 2 sentences, nobody is going to read out your 11 paragraph press release, nobody. Then one size doesn't fit all. So you have to do your research. Means, I think, as I said, the international thing. So sitting in the UK, if you're catering to, you're working with a global audience or global media rather, so you have to know about the certain geography where you are operating. Localization is very important. Customization as per the geography is very important. Understand their culture. In fact, the society, the relevance, as means a story which is very relevant in the UK might not appeal to the people sitting in Bangladesh or Philippines. So that's something is, I have some stories, if you want, I'll share that, but like I still remember a couple of launches, but I think I'll leave it for the later part of the discussion.
Right, do share them later on. Adam, what's your thoughts?
Yes. I think one of the things that I found is working with a lot of brands and companies, they have so much information. So if you're dealing with the CEO or C-suite, they've got so much information in their heads, and they've been talking about the launch or whatever the story is for months, that they'll say, this is the story, this is really interesting. No, not really. But that thing you mentioned before, I know everyone knows that. No, they don't, because you've been talking about it for so long, it becomes not news to you. But for a journalist, that is what will catch them. It's, you know, it's the biggest, the fastest, the most expensive, the first. If you've got a great superlative to put in there, or a great figure. And what I find with companies and brands is that often it's our job. I go in, sit with them, interview them to get that nugget of news that sets off everything else. And often they're not aware of what is great, but may think that something is great that isn't so interesting.
No, I mean, that leads very nicely on to, you know, what makes your brand newsworthy to get the best coverage. And, you know, sometimes people have got a great, they think it's a great story, but they might come to you and think not, or it sounds like actually they might have a lot that they don't think is newsworthy, but actually is. Adam, you wanted to follow on?
Yeah, I think that it goes to everything that I just said. Sometimes the strategy from within doesn't always match what will make, whether it's for TV, for radio, for print. There's a lot of ingredients that need to be met, and I don't think that always, not all the time, but sometimes companies and PRs, we don't always see straight away what it is that needs to be done. So it's our jobs as comms professionals to tease out those nuggets of news that we know we can't never guarantee that we'll make, but we know it's got a best chance of making. Whether it, you know, if the copy isn't 10 out of 10, it may be 8.5 out of 10. Have we got a 10 out of 10 picture that will make sure the copy's used? Or is there a great video, or is there a great quote, or is there a big number? It's teasing out that bit of that diamond of information that we can then use to get everything else in.
Yeah. Deborah, is that what you're finding with your clients?
Yeah, actually, yeah, definitely. This, and both Adam and I do media training, and that is, I always find that you start off, and it's about 2:30 in the afternoon that real story comes out, that it is actually when you're spending time with people. And like Adam says, being too close to something is such a problem, because you're not seeing what the real story is. I'd also like to add that it's a number of things I'm really noticing with my clients at the moment is, one, they come to me and say, quite rightly, they're so passionate about their idea, and they're saying, you know, this is such a fantastic story. Why haven't I got a, you know, page in the Daily Mail or whatever? And I look at it and think, I don't know what your story is. So actually, I spend a lot of time with my clients really working through, you know, I was a Sky News presenter. We had to boil, and I worked a lot in medical research, which I can assure you is the most complicated area you can ever work in. But everything could be boiled down to that 20-second soundbite. And it's a really good kind of practice. And the camera, I work a lot with cameras, is such a fantastic way of really kind of holding a mirror up to a company and saying, you know, what is that story? And it's the why, isn't it? It's why should people care about what you're talking about? And the other thing I think is really important, which is my favorite killer fact, is it's been around for a long time, but I noticed it again in a newspaper this week, was that killer fact that makes you think. It's not about your product, it's setting a context around something. And it's that idea, you know, HP ink, and they say it's more expensive than champagne. There's a big thing about, I hope nobody from HP is here, but there is this big thing about, you know, why is HP ink so expensive? But something that uses a little bit of humanity, a little bit of humor, to really kind of set your product or your idea in a wider frame, I think is really important. And also the other thing, clients, I think, which certainly is when I was a news journalist, which there was a really interesting thing about impartiality. When I was a news journalist, if you cut yourself in half, you had impartiality, you know, through you like a stick of rock. It's a big debate on whether that's so important now. But when you're talking to journalists, there is that idea of not selling your product, but selling the problem that you're trying to solve. Every product or every idea is trying to solve a problem, so that you're really moving away from any sales talk, because it really kind of gets in the way of messaging. And as a journalist as well, it's almost like any sales talk is kind of go away. So really trying to kind of stick to the facts, that brevity, that really crisp, crafted message that can break through.
Great, thank you for that. Arun, what's your thoughts?
I'm just adding to what Deborah has said. Of course, you need the crux of it. You need the brevity into it. At the same time, you have to weave a story. It's not like plain boasting. We did this, we did that, and who said that or who said this. It's as human as possible. Make it as human as possible. Weave that story. Make it more relevant. Of course, we have to think about the audience, two audiences. One is my audience, whom I'm going to communicate to, and be the audience of the news outlet, whoever it is. It's a television, or it's a radio, it's a print. It's a story for Sun or FT, okay, whom we are talking to, or a Guardian, or a hyperlocal Maidenhead Observer, maybe. So you have to, I think, customize your story. I'm still, as I said, the human thing. So that's something which is very important. I still remember a campaign which we handled around 4 years back. This is an organization called RSPO, that's called Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. It's a global organization which works on sustainability and palm oil production. So it's a Malaysia-based organization. So they wanted to start their operations in India. And they wanted some stories to be done there. So to create awareness about their organization. So what they did is they were forcing me to arrange an interview with their country director. That had given me a long note of data, rainforest, production, sustainability issues, and everything. I asked them, and they were just asking one thing: get a couple of interviews of a country director. I said, stop it. Let's do the story on one farmer, because the farmer who produces the palm trees, who plant, and the orangutan. Orangutan is the most affected species on the earth in the rainforests due to the palm forests. So we did a story like the burger you eat, the palm oil it gets cooked in is killing somebody, the orangutan. And that orangutan story goes all around all the media in India, all the English vernacular local languages. Everybody had covered that story. And after that, we got at least 3 requests from the media outlets to speak to somebody in RSPO. So that's how you start. Means it's not always, the pain point is people don't think about such things. They say, okay, we have done this. And as Adam said, that you interview them, you talk to them, get a story out of what they wanted to say, and sell their story. Then rest of things will go along with it.
It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts actually on sort of, because we talked about more the strategic side of a business and what they're doing or have done. But what about sort of the stunts? People, do lots of stunts to get the headlines. Is that a good strategy? Are there more sort of low-hanging fruit, perhaps, or different strategies to take than some crazy, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the crazy stunts that's happened. Adam, what's your thoughts?
A stunt can work wonders. It can be expensive, but it can work wonders. I think there was a phase about 10 years ago of floating something down the Thames.
Yeah, I was thinking of the same one.
Must have been done about 5 times, and it always works. When I left the Times to join a PR firm, we did a stunt in London and New York. In London, it was taking over a building on Millbank and making it look like it was crumbling. The windows were coming out. It was with dead mouse, and it was incredible. I mean, it cost a lot of money, but it got coverage. The ROI was incredible. And in New York, it was working with Nicki Minaj, and took over all the billboards in Times Square as she did a concert. I think if you get it right, it's worth every penny. But sometimes it can be the last throw of the dice. It can feel desperate sometimes if it's not done right. But a great picture, a slow news day, Sunday for Monday, a good stunt, a good picture is always works.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we're getting a few questions in, so I'm going to weave this one in from Marcus, because I think it's quite relevant. He said, do you have any tips and tricks to engage with the press when your product / company is extremely niche and probably only known by those who need the service that you offer? Adam, you're nodding, so I'll let you take that one.
Yes, I once was contacted by a VAT reclamation company, which sounds really, really dry and very niche. But again, talking to the CEO, the COO, we got a story about how much they were saving. British people had businesses but were exporting abroad, and it was, you know, a really big figure. And it got on Sky. I think it made many national papers, trade as well. But don't forget local papers. Everyone sometimes, a lot of people forget local papers, great readerships around the country. And if you haven't got a national story, try and find a local one. And if you can get a local one, then a lot of national newspaper journalists will read their own local papers to get a story. And it's a nice little backdoor way to then get a national story. But again, it comes down to talking to the client, interviewing them, making sure your release is punchy, spot on. I do a lot of training with PR agencies about how to write a press release, how to make sure that what will work for the journalist, and that's not necessarily what the client may want in the intro, but sometimes it's ask forgiveness, not permission. And once they see it in print or online, they're usually happy anyway. But it's trying to tease out that news nugget. And if it's not national, make it local. If it's not local, make it trade, or a combination of all, or get a good video or a stunt.
Great. And Deborah, we talked a bit about sort of that low-hanging fruit and podcasts and different things that you're doing with your clients.
Yeah, so and it's interesting. I was just going to say about the stunt, because I love a stunt as well, and I have actually, especially in the NHS and at DFID, been at the PR end of the stunts, and they're a nightmare. And they do secure the kind of the national coverage, which might not be what the client wants at that point. But so yeah, I think they're great. I think the landscape now is incredibly difficult. I also want to warn against stunts that are not linked to a wider strategic communication strategy, because some of my clients as well, particularly in the places they are, sometimes you don't want the media in at certain times. And so, you know, any kind of like media you're doing does need to be kind of woven into that wider communication strategy. And, you know, is it something you want to do? And, you know, and it is true, you know, with a headline today, great when they really go viral and they go across social as well. But if it is just that one-off event, you know, what you might cost you a lot of money is how is it really kind of feeding into your objectives? So, so what I do with a lot of my clients now is encourage them to be content creators, because you are then the journalists, all those journalists out there, all those fantastic opportunities, all the freelance journalists, some journalists being crowdfunded to cover stories, you know, if there's something they want to do, is to be a content creator. And one big part of my job is training people to show up on video, because it is one of the most powerful ways, because you're seeing the whites of somebody's eyes. You're building trust in your brand because they can see the passion you have for your product, and you have that ability to reach kind of huge audiences. And one of the #1 problems I have with clients is they don't like doing video. And and it's nothing to do with skill or how they appear on it, but they just have this kind of block about getting on video. So, I mean, that's the one thing I would say, take control of your content, get on, you know, not always appropriate, but, you know, somewhere like Substack is a fantastic way to start really showing the passion you have for your product, for your idea, for anything like that, because it is that passion that really kind of fires people up. And obviously Twitter is the obvious one that the journalists apparently according to the media show that journalists are on it like 4 hours a day or something ridiculous. Wow. So, you know, obviously things like that are the obvious ones, but looking at those other, and the media is changing so fast, isn't it? And if we keep that curiosity and keep looking for what there is out there that we can start kind of engaging with, I think then you are raising your chances of guessing. And I do, you know, I do still genuinely believe if you're trying to persuade boards, if you've got a national newspaper headline, or you're getting into the, you know, some of the main news channels, it is such a lever to really kind of change people's ideas and change practice. So they are, you know, they might be more difficult to do. I think they're still really powerful as well.
Great, thank you, Deborah. And actually, we're getting a lot of questions through now, so I'll just sort of weave to some of them. But someone's asked if you could send some information on the Substack and, you know, what they are, the best ones, or how to go about that. We can share that afterwards with the audience. Quite a few questions on press releases. So advice on actually writing them. And also, you know, someone said, do press releases still work now? And are they better having key bullet points, 2 sentences, and taking a much more personal approach? Are clients still expect you to send out a full page with quotes, blah, blah, blah? So, Arun, do you want to sort of comment, and then Adam, you can talk a bit about that as well?
As I said earlier also, it's again story. It's not blah, blah, blah. It's a story. If you really want to sell a press release, you have to create a story. And what's a story? Which engages people, which appeals to them. Don't sell, again, statements, figures, data, quotes. No, it's the story. And keep somebody in front of you, or keep a mirror in front of you, I would rather say, and look at yourself. If you are going to read that story again, if you're not connected to the organization, if you're not connected to the brand, if you're not working with the company or the corporate, if not, then it's just a futile exercise. Okay, so create a story. Then again, as I said, yes, news press releases do sell. It's not gone, but the consistency is very important. You have to create a kind of a brand aura around your brand. And consistency means we have now this digital media around, which empowered us a lot. Keep writing, keep exploring, keep letting people know what you're doing, what, as Deborah said, the passion to what you do, the passion with what you want to tell, passion is with what you want to communicate. Keep writing at social media, provide insights, comments, project your experts, your CXOs. So journalists also do their own research. They keep on looking on all those things. They will get somebody from your organization. They'll call you someday and ask you, okay, your CXO, your chief marketing officer, I want to speak to them about this, because you have never contacted them, but they will be contacting you. So that's something that means keep hope. It's still alive, A. And B, of course, as we are talking about the stunts are kind of a low-hanging fruit, I think, but it's a risky business. It boomerangs many times. So I believe less, as Adam said, means sometimes it works, but if it's shabbily done, it doesn't work at all. So written words always work, but there should be some passion, there should be compassion inside that. There should be some relevant kind of a contextual content into that. Do that. And don't always vouch for op-eds, or means unless you are Unilever or BNP Paribas or UNICEF or Save the Children. Be part of the bigger stories. You get a quote of your organization in a bigger story. That would be great. So it's not only, I would say, the press release. It's whole aura around the brand you have to create.
Great, thank you. Quite a few questions on how to best get hold of journalists. Someone's written, I found it very hard to speak to journalists on the phone compared to 10 years ago. Is this a sign of the times? Another person's written 2 questions, to phone or to email, and how to get a journalist's attention on an email. Adam, do you want to give us your thoughts on that? Yeah,
I think lockdown made it so much harder. If you haven't got a journalist's mobile number, it's nigh on impossible these days to get hold of one. I know at the Times, I think they've done away with a lot of the landlines, and I think other newspapers are going the same way. The only way to do that is to make contacts, and it amazes me how many PR companies do not give members of the team time to go out, have a coffee. You know, it doesn't have to be an expensive lunch. It doesn't have to be an expensive dinner. It can be a coffee. But I think wait for the time when you know you've got that great story, email someone with a press release, but make sure the press release is targeted to the right journalist. There's nothing more annoying than if you're the crime correspondent and you get a press release about, do you want to spend a week reporting on caravans in wherever? So make sure you're targeting the right journalist with the right story. And once you've got them, say, look, can we be honest? I'm just starting out in my career. I'd love to have a coffee. I can come to you 10 minutes. And then as you progress through your career, you hope they stay in journalism and progress in their career. And, you know, I'm lucky I've grown up professionally with people who are now editors, news editors, executive editors, and, you know, hopefully they'll take my call. I've got their number. They don't always print what I want them to, but at least they'll take my call. But it's putting in that hard graft at the beginning and it pays off down the line. But the amount of PR firms who don't give their staff time to go out and actually meet people, I don't understand that.
And I think people need to take it upon themselves, don't they, to get themselves out there and meet people, you know, see it actually as a career development. It's not eating into their social time. It's actually for their longer term career, so they have more social time as they progress up. Absolutely.
It's, you know, you go into some industries and you need to take exams to progress. It's exactly the same thing. If you haven't got contacts, it's harder to progress because you can't ring up. You haven't got the mobile number of, you know, 6 journalists across different papers, different formats, whether it's online, broadcast, TV, radio. You need to have a variety of people you can call, say, look, it's a great story for you. But it's also, I think, the language that you use. You know, if you say, I've got a great Sunday for Monday for you, it's going to make a page lead. The assumption on their part will be you actually know what you're talking about. Whether you do or don't is a different matter. But if you're talking the language of the person you're selling to in any industry, that gets you ahead of anyone else who isn't. And I think it's learning those things that can help get your foot in the door and make contacts.
Absolutely. Thank you. Deborah, I've got a question specifically for you on podcasts. So how important is a podcast for your company these days? And how should we market it if we have one? Is that mainly through social platforms?
Yes. Yeah. So first of all, yeah, a podcast can be disastrous, firstly, because it can take huge amounts of time and you end up with 5 listeners. So not to go lightly into this, it is, and actually to make it kind of, you know, something that is worth listening to. But when it works, I think it is an absolutely fantastic way. And I so agree with what Adam's just said about, you know, how are we supposed to, if you're young in your career, how are you supposed to make those contacts? And actually, I was training a young guy who's now becoming quite a successful journalist. And we were doing some kind of training to get into the industry. And I said, just go out and start interviewing people and just do a podcast. And he did. And he put it on LinkedIn and he got 2 views, first of all. And now he's exploded and he's now a kind of young political journalist. So I think being brave in this industry and pushing out and really trying to, I do agree, I agree with both Arun and Adam that a press release still has that place. But as long as it's part of a kind of that wider communication strategy, and, you know, in your press release, as long as everything's kind of seamlessly tied up. But I would urge people that if you're going to podcast, and the other thing is, if you start approaching quite well-known people as a podcaster, and if you look on Rocking the Journey, look on my podcast, we have people like Dame's Helena Kennedy talking about human rights and things. And that was just a phone call saying, can you come and talk to us about this? And kind of, so you start to get access, and then you start to get credibility of journalists because they're thinking, actually, you know, you're attracting these kind of people. So the other thing I would just say about contacts, I hope that's enough about podcasts, is just to look everywhere for contacts. I mean, if you are lucky enough to live in areas that are, I don't know how to describe this, kind of liberal areas, then these next door, the next door kind of community interest platforms that people are kind of selling clothes on or whatever. Down my road, I have 3 journalists that are kind of pretty, I never knew, I didn't know, but you suddenly kind of, so it is keeping your, when you're at a party or get on Twitter, raise your profile. And then one thing I would say, if you, and Adam's so right, so hard to get through to national journalists now, but get on Twitter, comment on their thing, keep commenting on their stuff, send them a little note, they'll ignore you, send them another little note, they'll ignore you. And one day when you're, like Adam says, you're using the lingo kind of, I'm going to make your life a lot easier by giving you a story that is really kind of sensational, then you'll get through. And it's kind of using all the, not just emailing, not just phoning, doing lots of social, doing lots of kind of, talking to people. And probably when we all started, you'd be told to go out, your news editor would say, go out and come back with 10 stories and don't come back if you haven't got them. So you would have to turn up at the local coffee shop and start talking to people. And so really trying to get into that mindset, I think, and it's, the resilience piece, and I think of being kind of confident and keep pushing, I think is a really important point. And it's hard, it is hard.
Always be networking.
Yes.
So lots more questions coming through. Val's asked, how do we reshape the narrative in a sector which is constantly attracting bad news due to its frailty, e.g. social care? Arun, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that. Arun, do you have got any thoughts on how to reshape the narrative in a sector which is constantly attracting bad news?
Sorry, I missed your question. I think this audio was a little cracked.
Oh, sorry. We had a question come through from Val saying, how do you reshape the narrative in a sector which is constantly attracting bad news due to its frailty, such as the social care sector? So how should you reshape the narrative there?
In fact, once something is done, you cannot redo it. But of course, you can do a better story. You can the perseverance and persistence. I believe that is the key words. And if there is a story that's a bad story which came out somewhere somehow, you cannot undo the story. But you, as I said, means you have to think about better stories, project it, and as we were talking about the connections are very important. So if you don't have connections, okay, you start again, I'm saying that we have the power of social media, the digital media. You keep them just bombard with the with your kind of versions, okay, and then keep writing, keep connecting to the journalists all over who matter, the journalists who matter on the socials, telling them your part of the story, okay, and keep little patience. You'll be getting space there very soon.
Thank you.
To tell your things.
Good. Deborah, yes.
Sorry, this is, I have a social care client actually, and I find it a really interesting one because there's a huge recruitment crisis in social care as well. And one thing I think is really worth doing, particularly with the local media, is to really kind of be proactive in approaching, if they keep running bad stories, to actually approach one of the editors and kind of really try to kind of educate around, just how important this industry is to all of us. And encourage this kind of, there's fantastic human interest. I mean, Arun loved this. The human interest stories in social care are amazing. The people who are actually working as care workers and things. There's ex-journalists. I was just running a story the other day about an ex-journalist who's now doing social care. So it's absolutely full of really vivid, wonderful human interest stories, and really starting to push us out and challenge if the media is continually, kicking at your industry. I just think, I think there's a responsibility that, and journalists take, I think if they don't know unless you tell them, but, taking that responsibility to to cover the industry in a different way. I think that's certainly a conversation worth having.
Great, thank you. It'd be great to hear your thoughts now on embargoes. Someone's asked a question on that. What do you think of embargoes? Is there any point on a small news story, or are they an immediate deterrent to coverage? Adam, what do you think?
Listen, if you put an embargo on a story and someone breaks that embargo, there's nothing you can do. You just have to hope everyone honors it. I think if it's a run-of-the-mill story, it looks a bit silly sometimes to put an embargo on it. If it's got wider implication, it might be market moving, it might be something to do with government, and it needs an embargo. Everyone should respect that and understand why you've done it. But otherwise, if it's if it's a story that's going to be, page 7, 250 words, you don't want to over-egg the importance of it and risk annoying someone at the other end who thinks, what are these people doing? They obviously don't understand what an embargo is. This story doesn't need an embargo. Whether it runs on Sunday or Wednesday will not make any difference at all. So just be careful how you use an embargo, but be aware that if somebody breaks it, there's probably nothing you can do anyway.
Arun, what's your thoughts on embargoes?
No, I said embargoes are a useless thing. Okay, whatever you do, you want to somebody cover your story A, and then you put conditions of covering the story. That's a foolish thing to do. That's what I think. I have been a journalist. I know if a story is there and there's the embargo, and being a kind of a clever or shrewd journalist, I'll break that story first. If there's a story, if just a plain speaking, no. But if there's a story, I'll break it first. Okay, forget the embargoes. They want us to cover the story, we'll do the story. So embargo doesn't work, I think, the way people want it to be worked. A, B, so don't put the embargoes. Of course, you can request, and if you have the connections, you can pick the phone, call the journalist, ask them, okay, if you please, but if you please. It's not like you cannot put the conditions.
Good, thank you. That's helpful. Only sort of 5 minutes to go, and there's still quite a few more questions coming through. So pain points and not getting traction. So what are the pain points? What should you do if you're not getting traction on a story? Deborah, we talked a little bit about that on the phone, and how you work with clients on the sort of the strategic side when you aren't getting traction. What's your best advice there?
Yes, so not getting traction is such a, and it's so depressing, isn't it? You're putting a lot of effort into your content and nobody's looking at it. And I think it is definitely about, just kind of cycling back and thinking about what your key messages are, about looking at things strategically, about seeing, who is my audience? Where are they? Not making assumptions of who your audience is. And actually there was this bizarre factor saw the other day that the women over 55 spend more on gaming, that they spend more time gaming than young men. So, really understanding, not making assumptions, but really understanding where your audience is, and then looking at what is the medium that best, hits that audience. I think there's so many kind of tips when you're writing on, I was writing on WordPress the other day, so many tips about how to write to really gain traction. And so these are all free kind of tools that you can use. So making sure anything you're writing is cross-linking, that linking to other things is really important. So you're not just putting out a kind of, just a think piece with no kind of call to action or no link back to something. So they're always being an objective in trying to put the information out. Measurement is so important here of understanding where your audience is coming from. I definitely do not believe in this idea of just keep pumping it out, because if you're not gaining traction, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the message. You're either not going in the wrong place, or your messaging is wrong, or you're not linking, or something's happening. Obviously, the mainstay of PR is kind of consistent and sustained. So, that Tuesday quote or something like that is really useful. I think I also think, again, this resilience piece is really important. So not being kind of disheartened but using everything as data, what is working? When is that time when you actually get something across? However, interesting, I was talking to one of my colleagues is a branding expert, and she actually completely disagreed with what I just said. And she said, actually, just pumping out the brand, though you might not be getting any kind of obvious traction, at some level, it's subconsciously going into somebody. And actually, it was a social care client that they were just pumping out all this material, but it was heavily branded, which to a journalist is, eek, I don't like that. It's too much. But, that trust factor. So, keep pumping things out. I wouldn't advise that. I think that engagement piece and Arun's point about, really human interest stories, but using that as data and then trying something different. And, McDonald's, for example, is somebody that they push something up. They try some kind of, it was something like chocolate burgers or something. They put it up one day and see what happens. Just see what happens. Nobody pays any attention, take it straight down. Try something else. And kind of be creative about those kind of things. And there's something that's just gone viral lately, which is a guy, he's a comedian, I think. And he did these walks. One was Trump, one was Macron, it was
Yes, I saw it, yeah.
If you look back on his feed, he was getting no attention at all. And suddenly these walks set it alight. So it's, really interesting to look at what other people are doing and what is that thing that kind of breaks through. Humour is a wonderful thing to break through.
Adam, what's your thoughts?
I think it's also understanding how a newspaper works and when to pitch to a publication. When they have conference, there's no point pitching a story for Saturday at 5 o'clock on a Friday, or if you're going for a Sunday, you don't want to do it on Friday morning because most of the paper will have been done. If you can get in front of someone Tuesday before they start planning the paper, then great, you've got more chance because the paper won't be filled. If you can get there before, get in front of a journalist before morning conference, they can go to their news editor. And if you can hand everything over on the plate, if you can say to the journalist, look, here's a great page lead, here's a great picture, here's a great video, the journalist can go to the news editor and say, look what I've got. The news editor can go into conference to the editor and say, oh, we've got a nice page 3 here. This is what I suggest we do. Everyone looks good. It flows uphill on this occasion. So I think the more you can prepare and hand over on a plate, the easier it is for everyone thereafter. But it's also knowing when to pitch. Is it a Friday for Saturday story, which may be different to a Tuesday for Wednesday story? Is it a Sunday for Monday when the courts are closed on the Sunday? Obviously, Parliament isn't sitting. So there's less news around, so you've got more chance, but it's a smaller paper. It's just understanding what story fits what day and what newspaper.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions that come in, one on the sort of medical research side and one from a charity perspective. So medical research press releases, is it better to lead with the research or a case study? And on the charity side, I work for a homeless charity. Is there a way to take facts and figures that are quite often depressing and make them into something interesting to journalists? Adam, which one would you like to tackle?
I'll take the first one on research. I think always lead with what the research is doing. Take the story forward. So will you be saving 400 million lives over the next 10 years? What is it you're doing? Always have a case study. But use that almost as a sidebar. You want the main story is this is what we are doing, this is how we're saving, doing whatever it is, and then here's the proof. Here is quotes from someone, here's a picture of someone, and then it's proof of life. It's here is a story and we can prove it's working. And if that case study is available for interview, so much the better.
Great, thank you. And Arun, do you want to ask sort of homeless charity, we've got facts and figures that are quite depressing. How do you make this interesting for journalists?
There's a couple of things, as I said, that it's very important to put a face on the story. Generally, technically, we call it PTC, PTG, particular to general. We can say that, yes, Alan is somebody who has been benefited from what we did our research or something like that. That is the one way of doing it. But I have a very good example of some very dry stories or dry areas to make it a story. There's an organization called TDH, Terre de Hongs. That's a Swiss organization, works on the child abuse, exploitation, trafficking all over the globe. So they work on mica extraction in India and China, where a lot of child labor working on that. So they had a report, and it was all about how these kids are getting exploited there. And that means that report was not getting enough traction elsewhere. So we did a kind of a exercise on that, and we just changed the title of the report. Earlier it was how mica extraction or mica mining industry is exploiting the children in India and China. We changed it to hidden cost of beauty. That was the Canadian campaign. Then there was in Southeast Asia, there was your lipstick has blood into that. Your lipstick has blood of a kid or something like that. And third one was beauty and a beast. Beauty and a beast. Because mica mostly being used for glowing things. Okay, car paint, nail varnish, lipsticks and all. So that made it relevant. Then the story was outside all over. So that one element, the news nugget out of that, that is very important. It may be a completely dry topic, but this is something which means you have to create your own headline. You have to think about what is something which hits you. Then you'll be hitting everybody else, I think.
Yeah, thank you. One last question before we have to close, and that's on generational differences. So are the younger generations reading newspapers, and we've talked a bit about the decline of circulation, and how do you engage? Deborah, I'm going to throw this one at you because I know it's a topic that you're interested in. So how do we engage with the younger audience, and is that the time that businesses are trying to get hold of them to nurture them for the future?
Well, I have some horrible 20-year-old children that will not read newspapers, so despite my influence. So so a couple of thoughts I had about this. I mean, we've all, kind of, I see it through my kids' lens and through other people, my friends' kids' lens. But one thing I really think and notice is they're very tribal. I mean, we were probably all tribal in our own way, but there's much with such a fragmented market. They are, so my kids are just, I was talking to them about this before, they don't listen to the news headlines, and they work, they work in professional jobs, which kind of astounds me, but they get their news from particular influencers, and they will go to a lot of podcasts to get, so they're almost kind of having the filter through these kind of people who have become very influential, like Joe Media is a great example, but lots of other things as well. And it's almost that is their go-to place to get news. So the criticism is always that becomes a real echo chamber, and that we are becoming such a polarized world, and that's where it comes from. But if you're trying to reach that market, I think it is what's happening. I don't think they're reading and even people who are in law or in kind of medicine, all these kind of professions, they are not coming into this kind of 10 o'clock news. Even the Sky headlines, maybe Sky headlines more. I think they do have a younger audience. But really seeing where the kind of tribes are, and trying to get through to those. And if you've got a certain amount of time, if your audience is under 35, I mean, top of my thing would be Joe Media, and what are those other platforms that are attracting those kind of groups. And the other thing I think is really interesting is that we criticize young people for just wanting these headlines. But actually, I think they are going deeper into news. They might be just taking the headlines through Instagram and stuff like that. But then, I think even the tortoise, which is one of my favorite, this idea of slow news, That's got quite a young readership as well. So and listeners too. So really understanding what their kind of behaviours are. It definitely is the headline. TikTok, of course, is the kind of big thing, and actually on medical research, and a fantastic way to get your kind of scientists out there doing bits of TikTok, kind of. But then kind of taking them over to, you know, where are those deeper things? Podcasts, I think, are really big for this younger generation.
Arun, do you want to take some closing remarks on that?
Yeah, I think yes and no. Yes, younger generation, they're not interested in newspapers, but they consume news more than anybody right now, whatever seen. I have two kids, two sons, 22 and 17. Okay, and whenever I ask them or tell them about any issue or any development or any news about this, they know about it. They know. Okay, so I think it's the age of indirect consumption. Okay, many times they don't know what the source of the news is, but they consume the news. As Deborah has said, there's multiple kind of podcast. There are influencers, there are TikToks, there are videos. So even if they don't read a newspaper, not to worry, they consume the news and they are very interested, I would say, because when we were young, then there was another kind of a ecosystem. Now the ecosystem has been changed. So even if they don't, means, as you said, the closing remarks. So if they don't read the newspaper, not to worry, they consume the news for 100% sure.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to you all, Arun, Adam, Deborah. That's been really fascinating, insightful, and it's been great to have so many questions from the audience as well. We have recorded it. We will be typing it up and getting some great content that we'll share. But thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening, our great panel and all the audience today. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.